The Lieutenant Governor of the state of Mississippi, Delbert Hosemann, joins us right now. He's been in office since the 2020 election, previously the Secretary of State. And you've signed up for this. Has it been as much fun as you had hoped?
Yeah, it's been great right now. I mean, we are state's in the best financial situation it's ever been. I mean, ever since 1817. We've had some phenomenal years, and I'm real proud of the legislature, House and the Senate, on the work that they've done to date. It is just really unbelievable. We have had the largest teacher pay raise. We've had the largest tax cut. We've put in more than ever, $2.1 billion in roads and bridges, and all of those things. And we've shrunk the size of government by like 10%. And we've just had a lot of things that we've worked on. And lo and behold, we have about probably $1.6 billion in cash that is in our pockets to be able to spend on the things taxpayers think we ought to be spending them on.
Lieutenant Governor, I've got a dear friend who says the most difficult word to say in the English language is no. And
yeah, we're going to have to do that this year. So
well, but you've had to say no some in the past, but that has put the state in position to be able to say yes to some of those things that you mentioned, like the teacher pay raise and the bridges and the overpasses and the infrastructure stuff that needed to happen so desperately.
Right, and you're dead right about that. It's funny. People don't remember that. I'm glad you did. We started 3 years ago by cutting the budget of the state by 2%. And so consequently, you cut budget and you have more revenue, you have this kind of excess. So you're right. This didn't happen by accident. I was real proud of the legislature cutting the budget to start, and then being very very judicious with how we spend our money. And I'm just real pleased with them. And this year, I anticipate that we'll have a rebate paid to taxpayers. We're going to give them some of their money back, and I think that's very appropriate. It's their money, and it ought to be given back to them. So I anticipate that's going to come this year. As we've had money come in excess of our budgeted amount, we ought to give it back to the taxpayers.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I wanted to go next. I mean, when you look at excess, when you look at money in the bank, that's a great issue to have. I suppose with some that there might be a tendency to want to go spend that money like a drunken sailor, whereas really you need to be cautious. So in terms of a rainy day fund, preparing for the future, I know that there's been legislation in the past that requires that to be fully funded. So where are we in terms of preparing for the future, but then also the balance of, you say, okay, a tax rebate, but also we now have the opportunity to invest in certain areas of the state of Mississippi. How do you go about deciding where those investment dollars go?
Well, that's the good part, I think. We first on your first point, we have funded the rainy day fund. It's 10% of our budget, so it's like $600 and something million, and it's been funded the last 2 years. And we will fund it again this year, but we don't have to put very much in it because our budget's been pretty close to the same, a little bit increase every year, but for inflation, less than inflation actually. So it'll be $650 million we've got set aside in the rainy day fund. It's fully funded.
And so for clarification, that's the amount that needs to be there, 10% of the budget. That's not correct. That amount has to go in on an annual basis.
That's correct, because we've been saving it the last few years. So we'll have $650 or $700 million in the budget, plus this other $1.5 billion or so additional cash. So we will have the rainy day fund. And then you're right on point about, how do you spend your money, and the first thing to do is to give taxpayers their money back for some of this. Obviously, we managed our money well, and so we've got money extra. We ought to give it back to the people who paid it to us. Then the second thing is we haven't borrowed any money. Like last year, we didn't borrow any. We're not going to borrow any money this year. So we're able to conduct the government without this increase in rates, as you've seen, jump to like 7% or something. We're not borrowing any money. And so that the fact that we've got cash to run ourselves without borrowing money saves us a whole lot of debt. We've actually paid off $300 million, I think, in debt last year, and I think we pay off another $300 this year in interest and principal. So we're paying down the state debt and not borrowing any money. That's really important in your personal lives. As you know, when you get your credit card or your home mortgage or something, you know how important it is not to have debt.
How much debt does the state of Mississippi have?
We're running right now about $4.5 billion, which is actually low for most states. to have $1.5 billion in cash and $4.5 billion in debt, we're in excellent financial situation. Our bond rating and everything would be great if we were borrowing any money, but we're not.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And then the other part you said, Richard, is dead on. How do we spend that money? And I will tell you some of my priorities for this coming year, and I hope the Senate's as well. We want to go back to our education again. We gave the largest teacher pay raise, but there are some other things that we need to do. The MAEP formula needs to be better funded. It wasn't hardly funded at all in prior years. But in addition to that, there is this wave coming of going to quarterly system schools. Now, the first one was in Corinth, and that's where I started probably about 3 years ago, pushing on this. And this year, we want to encourage that. Lamar County, Gulfport has gone to quarterly systems, and basically the kids are in school, our children are in school 9 weeks, then off 2 or 3 weeks, 9 weeks on, 2 or 3 weeks, and they get Christmas and whatnot.
Sure.
And then a very short summer vacation. So our kids are basically getting educated during the entire year. Now, the reason that's so important, right now we're educating kids like 180 days a year is the requirement.
Right.
But really when you get testing and off days and everything, I don't know that we ever really meet that. So we're actually educating our children half the time and expecting them to be in competition with China and Korea and Germany and all these other places. So we really want to give our kids the opportunity to have education on a more regular, full-time basis. Now, what that means is that our children now will have these periods in which they're in school in a structured environment, getting fed and all the other things, and going through an education environment during the 2 or 3 week period. That's called an intersession. And during that intersession, kids can catch up if they were behind, or they may want to take some additional time off, or they may want to take an additional course, an accelerated course of some sort. So it gives us a lot of flexibility for kids that maybe need a little help to get caught up. And what you'll see this year from the Senate and the House, I think as well, I can't speak for the House, would be a financial incentives for all school districts in Mississippi, all 130-something of them, to go to a quarterly system. Now, right now, we probably have 5 or 10 that are there, and we would like to see all of our schools start that process where we can keep our kid in an educational, safe environment, pretty much around the years. And the last thing I want to talk about this, and we'll go on. I know you have other topics, but the test scores here are very good. Like in Lamar County, they tested the same this year as they did for COVID. Everybody else went down like 8 or 10% in their test scores. But we went down in Mississippi less than the national average, but they hardly went down at all in where they were doing these quarterly systems. So it's educationally incentive. And then the teachers were about 82% in favor of this, and the parents were about 82 or 85% in favor of this, as they've experienced it for a year or two. So the people that are in the process are very encouraged about it. And of course, the thing that would hit you is, how does this affect football season? And it doesn't. And I will tell you, the football team still played, and everybody still came to the games. In fact, I think they had picked up because people hadn't seen each other in a while. So it turned out to be very, very positive.
You know, it's interesting. I live in Oxford, and Oxford has adopted kind of a hybrid version of this. They didn't jump into the deep end, but they kind of partially
they're
went
edging
with
that
it.
way. That's right.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. My bigger concern, honestly, is my kids, and whether or not them having that longer summer break is a negative or a positive in the long run. We'll continue with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann after this. Middays on Super Talk Mississippi. Welcome back, Middays. Richard Cross in for Gerard Gibbert. We're glad to be with you on Super Talk Mississippi, streaming at supertalk.fm and on supertalktv.com as well. If you want to be part of the conversation, if you've got a question for the Lieutenant Governor, we'll try to work that in over the next couple of segments. You can send it to us on the C Spire text line at 601-879-4395. Tomorrow, Middays with Gerard Gibbert, and it actually will be Gerard, not me, and Good Things with Rebecca Turner will be live in downtown Cleveland, celebrating their beautiful display of 50 nights of lights, where over 1 million lights transform Cleveland into a winter wonderland this holiday season. It's now through January 1st. You can view the lights by walking down the trail or by driving, it's free. That downtown Cleveland area is just spectacular.
They've done a great job.
Oh, what a wonderful
job. The mayor
job
up there and the whole community is really involved in that, and it's all tied in, of course, to Delta State University. And but no, the downtown, how they've arranged it, and they've got a nice new hotel down there and lots of shops for people to go spend money on. It's just really nice. They've done a good job.
A lot of good stuff. We could spend a long time on the schools conversation, but I don't want us to be too narrowly focused because there's so much that's on the horizon. I will ask you this question. This is from Terry. He says, I'm wondering how in the world that the state can't find the money in this huge surplus to finish Highway 25 in North Mississippi. So,
it's on my list.
Infrastructure, here we go.
You know, it was just on a tear about me, and I don't mind telling you the rest of this story, and we'll get to the number. But I too had that frustration, and Highway 49 from Florence was like $250 million. It was way over budget. Took forever, 4 or 5 years. So everybody that came into Jackson from south, from Simpson County or wherever, is complaining, and he's right about that. So we started a really aggressive. I went over to MDOT and I met with them and met with the people in their offices and their planning people, and why is this taking so long and how can we do that? So this last year, he'll be pleased to know we did contracts for $963 million from MDOT. We put up a little over $2.1 billion into roads and bridges in Mississippi, and 7 south of Oxford, Richard, where y'all are.
I'm quite familiar with that.
Yeah, all of those, and then in Hernando, from Hernando up to the Church Road area up there to increase those. All of those are on the horizon, as well as some in South Mississippi and in Port Gibson in West Mississippi, the bypass and whatnot. The MDOT has narrowed down the actual ones, and I call them the front page, the ones that are on, are up for actual completion. We have 2 functions in that, and I'll cover them real quickly. One is a design phase, and we appropriated an additional $35 million to give MDOT advance money to do the design phase. And then we appointed another $40 million to put it to do the maintenance for 2024. So we have paid for the maintenance for this year and next year on Mississippi roads in advance, so that MDOT could get started on his point that he's raising right there. So I'm real pleased with where we are. We're going to push through the ones that are listed on what I call the front page. And the thing that I was particularly proud of, the legislature didn't change any of MDOT's recommendations. They have a list that they prepare by fatalities, by traffic count, by age. They have a lot of different criteria that they go through to determine where they're going to build these new extensions and whatnot. And they go through that process, and we have trusted them to do that. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, we gave $100 million to counties to fix roads and bridges in the counties. They applied for $300 million. Of that $100 million, we allocated the $100 million. I hope to have another $100 million for counties, roads, and bridges for my supervisors to go fix this next year, and then one more after that, and we'll have our county roads and bridges, very, very near the requested amount. And in addition to that, on the last part of this, it's all about money, I guess, but we saved $350 million of the American Rescue Plan money. We didn't spend all our money. Mm-hmm. We matched the cities and the counties for doing water and sewer. They put up $450 million, and we put up $450 million. So there's $900 million of water and sewer and stormwater work that'll be done in Mississippi. And then we saved the other $350 million to see where we needed to spend it this next year. So there is huge infrastructure projects. You're going to see a lot of barrels and backhoes out there, and it's about time. So I'm pleased at the process. We're not near about there. It takes too dadgum long, Richard, to get anything done.
And I don't know that there's any. We can go a mile wide or a little bit deeper, but a question that I have. You talked about the allocation to the counties, to the supervisors, $100 million over the course of 3 years for $300 million requested. How do you avoid getting to a spot where a decade from now they need another $300 million or another $500 million? Is there a plan in place to maybe have, after this initial $300 million request is fulfilled, maybe there's 30 to 50 to 100 million that stays in a reserve to be able to handle those requests on an ongoing basis as opposed to we get so far behind and then we have to play catch up?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Our most of that work is being done on bridges, and we had a lot of bridges that were out and whatnot. So we're hopeful that the bridges that we rebuild, will end up lasting 40 years or 30
years. They're good for a
while. So we don't have to come back. And so we have a division of MDOT there that does the ERBR, Emergency Road and Bridge Program, in conjunction with an advisory group. And so those monies hopefully will go into a longer term where we don't have to be catching up. Some counties were better, quite frankly, about keeping their bridges up than others. Mm-hmm. And we've got a list, and you can see them, the ones that didn't spend as much money as they should have on keeping their roads and bridges up for whatever reason. So I think I'm very hopeful that this scenario will give us a long-term solution without us having to pony up after that.
We will we'll talk about a few more of the projects that are on the horizon that are kind of on your agenda for the legislative session. I said to Will when we began earlier today that I asked him yesterday, I was like, is it time to talk legislative agenda? And he said, oh, yeah. And I think I was still convinced that it was October but we're talking about a month and a week until the new session begins. January 2nd.
We've already done our legislative agenda for next year, so I've got the first drafts and stuff already ready to go.
There is the need for the Senate and the House to work together. Obviously, there will be differences of opinion from time to time. With the news that there will be a new Speaker of the House, how do you anticipate that relationship working out?
Yeah, we got a whole year to go. Philip Gunn and I do, and for full disclosure, we've already met on next year's session on priorities that he had and I had. We'll have other meetings long before we get here in January to go over that, and we have the leadership teams that come in. We meet every Tuesday during this next session, and probably meet before that coming in here. But it's usually the President Pro Tem and him and myself and maybe a senator or representative that has a specific issue. But we try to get down and see what we can work out as quickly as we can without getting in controversy, and how we can round edges to make sure things go smoothly. And I've really enjoyed my working relationship with Philip. And
but you guys don't always see eye to eye either, right?
No, he went to Baylor, so whatever. He was a quarterback at Baylor. I'm not supposed to see eye to eye, whatever.
Yeah.
No, he has, and I would use this. I think we have a compass that's both pointed conservative north, and we when we disagree, it's disagreeing on conservative one way or another about things that can go through. But in general policy matters, I don't know that we differ that much.
And then the third piece of it is trying to be in sync with the governor, at least to some degree.
Yeah, we really, that relationship has been, the governor, and I've talked to him about that over the times, but he basically tries to stay out of the legislation. And I think by and large he's done that.
Which is incredibly fascinating considering that he sat in your seat. And I don't know if it's because he sat in your seat that he feels the need to stay out of it, or would make him want to meddle more. I don't know.
It is hard because you'd want to question, like I would want to question how the Secretary of State did that. Why didn't he do this or that and the other? But you're really not the Secretary of State, and you're really not the Lieutenant Governor anymore. And I have really respected the governor allowing us to, scrape our knees on occasion and try to learn as best we could. He vetoes some of the stuff, but in the scope of things, it's been very little, actually. Very little vetoes by the governor. On occasion, we'll discuss with him what's coming up or something, but basically he's allowed us to be the Senate and the House to be the House, and he to be the governor.
Visiting with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann as we get closer and closer to the start of another legislative session, the final year of this 4-year window, which always brings up a question. How much gets done in the 4th year of an election cycle versus folks being focused on getting reelected? We'll ask him that question coming up next, plus talk more about what is on the horizon here in the state of Mississippi. Middays in the Element Wealth studio. Richard Cross in for Gerard Gibbert. More coming up after this. Welcome back. One last segment with the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Mississippi, Delbert Hosemann, who's been incredibly generous with his time today, just talking about some of the things that are on the horizon as we are just over a month away from the start of the 2023 legislative session. So this was kind of along the lines of a question that came in, and I mentioned before the break that I'd ask you. An election year, on the right, 2023 is. Will anything get done in an election year? Because there are some whose focus is on not doing anything to rock the boat to be sure that they are well positioned for re-election. Hopefully that's not the majority. How do you combat against that, or do you?
Well, first of all, y'all need to buckle up. We're going to have a full session.
Okay.
I'm just telling you, we have had, and the way you can see this building like you see anything else. We had hearings today on corrections. We had hearings last month on 0 women and babies from 0 to 3 years old. Right. There'll be significant legislation coming out on that. There are this American Rescue Plan money. There's like $350 million worth of that. We passed in the Senate postpartum care last year for women that are working that make more than the Medicaid amount. You'll see the Senate, I think, pass that again this year on the health care part. There are 2 other health care initiatives that are going on now that I know of. You just start down this list. We have this legislature, for whatever reason, has taken on everything. They have not blanched at taking on anything from taxes to education. And I think we'll continue to do that. The things that come up, obviously the spending is a critical part, but the things that come up on adoption and children and all of those others, I think we'll put them on the table and we'll tee it up.
So along those lines, I mean, buzzword alert, Medicaid expansion. People love to ask that question. Can those issues be handled on a case by case is not the right word, but can an individual issue be handled without necessarily lumping that into a Medicaid expansion conversation?
Yeah, I think on at least 3 different parts. The first, of course, there's something called a direct payment that we're working with the actual Medicare and Medicaid commissioners in Mississippi about, that would have significant monetary rewards for rural hospitals and regular hospitals. Postpartum costs the state about $7 million. It produces about $30 million in coverage for women and babies. We think that's really important. But yes, I do think you can separate different issues and bring them up without getting into a giant one. A bigger issue, Richard, and one we probably need to spend an hour on one time if somebody gets bored.
I don't have an hour today.
I don't either, and particularly on this topic. But our rural hospitals are struggling. Greenwood is really on the tipping edge, and other rural hospitals around are very, very close to not being able to do. And the reason is their nursing salaries and their other expenses have gone up, and their reimbursement rate has stayed virtually the same. So that under any economic model, the current model will not work for them to survive. So it's almost a bigger picture to look at exactly how we're going to deliver health care to people on an economic basis.
And isn't that reimbursement schedule, like, there's not just one entity to blame, right? I mean, so Medicaid reimburses at a certain level, private insurance reimburses at a certain level, and all of those things are negotiated.
The Medicaid is not. Medicaid reimbursements are set by the federal government.
Okay,
and so
that piece is not, but the private insurance is.
And then, like in some of our hospitals, our rural hospitals, they may be 80% Medicaid. So whatever the income is set by the federal government, period. And they may have 20% private pay of some sort or another. So they're in a position now that the last 20% can't make up enough for the first 80% that the government has decided to reimburse.
Because they're not getting enough to cover the cost of services based on what the government is supplying.
And the government part is not sufficient because of the nursing salaries have increased. The cost of everything has gone up. So it's very difficult. And I think when we look at this, I'm particularly attuned to making sure that we do something that's not just a Band-Aid here, no pun intended, I guess, on this topic, but that we do something that shows for a long-term vision of what rural health care will be in Mississippi. And just pouring some money into it right now will be helpful to sustain it for a shorter period of time. And for us to have a long-term solution, you really have to look at what our delivery of services are going to be to what scope and in what locations. And I think you'll see a lot of that coming.
Looking at the C Spire text line, there are lots of questions about highways, people, roads, bridges that always, and so it's like, what about this one? We're not going to go individually to that, but I was fascinated by this question. What's the biggest challenge facing Mississippi that nobody's talking about?
That nobody is talking about.
And I know from your perspective, you hope that whatever the biggest challenge is that you were talking about, but maybe that is not getting the attention that it deserves.
Inflation. We're fixing to have a recession. And
how significant?
I think it's going to be really significant. We just lost 2,500 jobs in North Mississippi in 1 hour. They fired everybody. Hewlett-Packard.
Talking about in the furniture industry.
And, of course, that's one of the tentacles of what economic development is about, and that's the first times you see people stop spending money on furniture. And Hewlett-Packard in the big HP company just laid off 6,000 people. You're seeing staff reductions from Amazon to everywhere. They're not doing that because they anticipate having a good year. They're anticipating having a bad year.
So they're planning ahead because most of those companies, many companies have been very, very successful over the boom of the last few years.
That's right. That's correct. And now they're
even post-COVID.
They're resizing themselves, and that's going to lead us to having our unemployment rate clicked up a little bit last month. Our withholding decreased last month for wages. You're seeing what we really, and I've been talking about, I guess, for a year or so, getting prepared for what will be a downturn in the economy. Now, what you call it or how you judge it, I think President Biden has a different definition than the rest of us. But however you do that, we're going to have less people, less jobs, less economics going through the system. So I think what we want to do is make sure that we as a state have sufficient money to continue to do the things that we need to do: roads, bridges, education, healthcare, the things that we want to provide to our security, highway patrol and whatnot. Those are the things that we want to have sufficient funds to do, though we don't have to be cutting the budget back to cut services. So that's why this money that we built up by running the place right is so important to us to maintain over a period of years and not spend in one fell swoop.
So that $1.6 billion that you were talking about that's sitting on the side, you don't want to allocate that in a single legislative cycle.
No, you shouldn't do that. You would just, first of all, there's not enough
Can that money grow, by the way? That's a side question. Are you allowed to invest that?
Yes, it does, and yes, I have been on the top of that. You should anticipate that I've been encouraging the powers that be that have control of that money to make sure that it's earning, and my last understanding was that we're somewhere close to 3%.
Okay.
But I've got to check back with them again. But yeah, as these
I'm glad it was not all plugged into a crypto.
No, we didn't do that. The legislature years ago required it to be in CDs, Treasury bills, that kind of thing. All of those have jumped up.
T-bills are up, sure.
And they are, and we're participating in that. And
who's in charge of that investment?
The state treasurer, and then the Department of Finance Administration, Liz Welch and her group.
So there's a lot of oversight.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is. There's a committee that does some of that, But yeah, I did check on that. I was making sure, because when you start talking about making 3% on $1 billion, well, that's a lot of money where I come from, which is South Warren County. So, I was very concerned about that, and
real money, as some people might say.
That's real money. We can pay for a few more roads and stuff, or another teacher salary, or whatever.
This final month before this session goes in, I know you make time for grandkids, for family, for the holidays, but there's also a lot of work to be done. What are you doing in this last 5 or so days before the session begins?
Well, we'll have meetings with the House, with the Speaker and his leadership team. Our leadership team and the group will be in. We meet with our senators, every committee chair. We have 30 chairmen in our in the Senate side. So every committee chair and I will meet about what their agenda is for the year, and we'll try to work through what's achievable or not achievable, or what do you think, those kinds of things. And that runs from health care to taxes to corrections to roads to universities, you pick it. So we'll be going through all of those before January the 3rd with our people getting our agenda together, and it will be robust. Again, we want to concentrate on the things that people ask us to do, and not get off on the weeds somewhere. And we really need to be very careful with the money that you've entrusted us with. I want to have some of it given back to you, and the rest of it spent well.
You said get off in the weeds. Was that significant?
No pun intended. That's one of the weeds I don't want to get into. We did that already, so I'm done with that.
I will leave you with that, Lieutenant Governor Hosemann. Thank you so much for coming in and spending most of the hour with us.
It's good to see you.
Delbert Hosemann, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Mississippi. A lot going on here in the Magnolia